Danny, can you bring up Dan McCardle? He did a little tweet thread this morning. I want to get your opinions on this. I don't think it's a healthy time right now to be telling people, hey, you should buy Bitcoin, it's an inflation hedge. I'm kind of nervous with that narrative at the moment because some people were buying Bitcoin at $50,000, $60,000 to hedge inflation, and not only has the price dropped, they've also had their money inflated away. But I found this really interesting. So if people listening, Dan McCardle claim Bitcoin has been an inflation hedge. Reality, Bitcoin responded aggressively to the 2020-2021 money printing and front ran CPI inflation, and BTC is still way ahead of other assets. So I think this is a really interesting point because the narrative of Bitcoin being an inflation hedge did start in 2020. People were talking about it then. I increased my stack. I expect you did. A lot of Bitcoiners I know did. Do you think this is just re-narrativing? Well, or do you think that's actually a fair shout? Like Bitcoiners are good at front-running inflation?
Narratives are simply narratives.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that most people want to assign very simple solutions to things. It's like, okay, if there's inflation, you buy gold, then gold will go up when inflation goes up. Actually, that's not true.
Okay.
Bitcoin, it's an inflation hedge. Why? Because it's limited supply. The reality is assets trade the way people want them to behave.
Okay.
Very simple. It doesn't matter what things are supposed to do, right? I mean, like good companies are supposed to go up in value. They don't always do that. Sometimes bad companies will spike, right? AMC Theaters. Remember that?
GameStop. Literally right? No business.
Things react the way that people trade them, period. If somebody wants to trade out of risk assets and Bitcoin is traded 24/7 and you're running a book and an event happens on Saturday and you can't trade stocks out of it, what are you going to do? I've got some Bitcoin in my portfolio. Why don't I just sell some of that? And then I'll sell the rest of it when the market's open. So that's all it is. I think people try to get too complex in the way that they assign reason to things, and the reality is things simply trade the way that people trade them.
Right. So Bitcoin doesn't have a narrative. It really is. Some people are buying a lot of it, and some people aren't.
If you see it as risk and trade it as risk, it becomes risk.
Right. It is risk. What do you think, Danny?
I mean, I think what Dan says here is quite interesting because he's basically saying like it has been a perfect inflation hedge, but
only because you timed it right.
Exactly. So I guess it's hindsight, like everything.
Only because you bought it before Saylor and bought it before Elon Musk, and then we had a run up.
Yeah.
What I'm curious of is whether any of the people that have sort of seen what Saylor did in the last run up and have been sort of sitting on their hands are going to sort of start deploying in the next, I don't know, year, 2 years.
Yeah.
Because people might get a better buy price than Saylor at this point.
Average buy price, if someone was buying today, where are we at? 29.5? 29?
Something like that, yeah.
And what it was 31 average?
I think it's something like that. I think it's underwater now.
I mean, you can't buy $1 billion right now and beat him because you will move the market, but you could certainly buy small amounts and.
Yeah,
but the tricky thing with Saylor thing, like people have had quite a pop at him about his average buy and being below. He bought what, 3 billion? He's going to move the market.
Mm-hmm.
But next cycle, if we do go above 70 or stay above 70 or hit 100, he's in prime position. But he had to buy into this cycle to do that.
Well, I saw an interesting tweet once, and I can't remember who to attribute it to, but it was somebody said, I should have known that when a software company that nobody heard of became famous because they bought a bunch of Bitcoin, that was the top of the market. But applying my principle really quick, let's go back to gold, for instance, right? Yeah. Typically, gold doesn't go up when inflation goes up. It's usually neutral. Gold historically has always gone up when people anticipate that inflation will happen.
Okay.
Right. So when smart people start looking at the markets and oh yeah, we're going to get inflation in a couple of years, they'll start loading up on gold in anticipation. Gold prices go up ahead of inflation, and then they remain stagnant. Okay. And then once the fears are over, gold's the first thing that sells off. Right. So that's why there's not a direct correlation there. Same thing with Bitcoin. Over the last 12 years, people have been buying Bitcoin in anticipation of inflation coming with really loose monetary policy. Well, there's been loose monetary policy. There hasn't been inflation, but Bitcoin's been going up drastically in anticipation of that. By the way, that's not the only reason it's gone up. There's several factors. That's just one of them.
Because I think it's also gone up because people have bought it because they think it's going to go up.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's a risk asset.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the other factor. And then the final factor is just simply the network effect. The more people own it, the more price has to go up to support the number of people owning it. Right?
Yeah.
So those are really the three main factors. Well, when one of those factors goes away, right? The first factor that went away was, okay, people no longer are taking big risk. They're selling risk. Well, that causes price to go down. The other one is, okay, well, inflation's here now, right? We've already bought Bitcoin in anticipation of inflation. Now it's here. And now we're going to sell it off and buy those dollars. So that's the other thing. And then from a network effect part, I don't really see that many more wallets being created versus, say, 2 years ago. So that sort of flattened out as well. So it's going to take one of those three things to bring it back up.
We also had the halving narrative, which timed nicely.
Yeah.
I think that we talked a lot about.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a year and 300 days away or something, and I'm expecting in about a year, when the year to go, that the people will be chirping up about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more narrative.
Yeah.
What I am interested in is more, if people start to think of Bitcoin as a hedge in another way, not a hedge against inflation. It is, but a hedge against a collapse of the currency. And I know that is essentially a hedge against inflation, but I'm thinking of it in a different way, in that if a currency collapses, if the dollar collapses, the pound collapses, I want to hold something that's seen as valuable. And you said property. I'm thinking, I'm not thinking hedging inflation. I'm just thinking I have something that has some fucking value.
Yeah, exactly.
Does gold have any part to play in this, do you think?
I think gold has lost a lot of its luster in the last decade. A lot of people bought gold into. Well, gold used to be what people used in the place of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Bitcoin has replaced it. I'm just saying that what happened in the last financial crisis is people started buying gold in anticipation of inflation over the next decade. Well, part of that anticipation was that central governments would be buying gold on their balance sheet to support their currency. That stopped happening. That usually happens in a recession, because that's the safety net for a government central bank. But what's actually happened is central banks have on a percentage basis have loosened up their gold reserves. And the US Treasuries has replaced gold as the holding instead, which is a really bizarre thing. So gold it really hasn't done what it has in the past, and it's lost that store of value.
Right.
Because governments aren't using it as a store of value anymore.
But didn't China and Russia bought a shitload of gold?
Russia did buy a shit ton of gold back in 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
But no, China focused on US Treasuries.
Okay.
And over the last decade, the gold purchasing has just basically stopped.
But if the dollar starts hyperinflating and it's no longer there for a store of value, could you see a switch back to gold?
Probably not. It'll probably be other currencies that are strong.
Okay.
A basket of currencies.
A basket of currencies. Interesting.
Probably with renminbi.
So what is the role in Bitcoin in all of this? Is it just a fucking random? Or because Preston talked about this. He thinks we could see this transition to Bitcoin.
I think it could happen.
Yeah.
I think it's going to happen on a more regional basis first.
Right.
I've always thought this, right? I saw your tweet, by the way, about Monero.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. A lot of people don't agree with you, but I do.
Well, there are people who have agreed with me privately,
mm-hmm.
and they're not going to say it. There's people who've agreed with me publicly, and there's people who've disagreed.
Yeah.
I just don't. I think if you're going to call something a scam, explain the scam.
That's right.
You can say you don't like it, or you can say, look, I think it fails against Bitcoin over a long enough period of time. But I'm not hodling with Monero. I just know there are transactions that I would maybe consider doing. But it's just, to me, it's not a scam. But yeah. I've said that since when we did the Fluffy interview was 2018, right?
Yeah,
I've been saying it since then. It's just I struggle calling myself a Bitcoin maxi because I've always been like, well, Monero's okay.
Well, I would even go even broader, right? I personally choose Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right. I like the fact that there's potential competitors out there because there's people that have different needs.
Yeah.
Right. There are some countries, look, it's very easy to track Bitcoin transactions.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is why Silk Road went down, because we traced every single transaction, and the FBI went and took it down and took around a lot of people around it. There are some countries that can't afford for the people in those countries where they're very oppressive regimes can't afford to just simply hold Bitcoin because it's not private enough.
Mm-hmm.
They need something else. And that's where things like Zcash, Monero come in.
Yeah.
Right?
I think I have a preference for Monero over Zcash.
Sure.
My problem with Zcash is my understanding is that cracking it is like a Sudoku, and not enough people are actually using Zcash at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think there's different trade-offs. We've actually got Seth, the guy on Twitter, Seth for Privacy. I don't know if you follow him.
Right.
He's worth a follow. He's coming in later today. We're going to be talking to him about that, because I don't know the trade-offs. I mean, I have people telling me that you can achieve privacy with Bitcoin, but really, I'm going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But also with Monero, what is my risk? Usually it's going into the market and coming out of the market. What exposure to have? So we've got someone in to explain to us. Another thing, actually, I meant to talk to you about. We had Andrew Desler in yesterday. He's a climate scientist who debated Alex Epstein. He was also on Rogan's show. He said there's a massive benefit to the economy for moving to renewables. And he said the problem is a large part of the economy is reliant upon a commodity where the price changes. He said if you can move the economy so large parts of the grid are from renewables where the marginal cost is zero, you don't have these impact of commodity prices. Therefore, you don't have commodity wars.
No, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it hadn't crossed my mind. He was like, yeah, I mean, if you're... he has a price where it costs to charge his Tesla. I assume it's a Tesla. He didn't actually say, but his electric car. And if our gas prices, fuel prices have doubled, has it cost him double to recharge his car? No, it has increased because part of the grid is powered by fossil fuels. But at the same time, he said, I'm looking to put solar panels on my house. So you can get to a point where even at an individual level, that perhaps you can hedge against the inflation of commodity prices by being electrified. But if you can get to a large part of the grid being renewable, you can't have everything. But if you did, you don't have that commodity prices impacting the economy. And 28%, did he say, because the Texas grid is now renewable?
Yeah.
He thinks it can get to 70%.
Yeah.
Other people argue against him, and he thinks the other 30, you can't get beyond 70% on renewables.
He said you could with nuclear.
Yeah, no, but it's debatable whether nuclear is a renewable.
Yeah, get carbon neutral or whatever.
Yeah, carbon neutral. But he said you can get to. He said the only reason we're not going faster in Texas is because of incentives. But if you get to that point where you essentially electrify your grid you electrify your houses and cars, and you do that on renewables, you suddenly don't have that impact because you did have, like I say, the marginal cost is zero. It hadn't even crossed my mind.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, and this is one of the issues with calling things renewable energy, right? It's like, okay, you've got renewables, we've got carbon neutral, you've got, carbon positive, but are interesting anyway, like natural gas. Natural gas just gets released into the air. Why not capture it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think definitions are really big things that people get caught up on. But all that being said, it is interesting to get more, to have more renewable energies, whether it's hydroelectric or solar, wind. Again, the problem with some of those are, they aren't really renewable because you've got to actually build the solar panels with non-renewable materials, or you've got to build windmills with non-renewable materials.
I think the renewable, hardly anything is renewable.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But I think his point on renewable is that it's avoiding fossil fuels. It's avoiding increasing carbon in the atmosphere. Yes, he talked about this as well. He did talk about solar panels being large parts of them can be recycled. Parts of the wind turbines are moving to materials that can be recycled, but also an investment in that will lead to a lower cost of building out that infrastructure because you have the economies of scale, and these things are improving.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, hydroelectric is probably the most renewable of all things, which to me, that's why it's really interesting when New York passed that bill to try to shut down Bitcoin mining in New York, and a lot of the energy that they use is hydroelectric.
They didn't ban all mining, didn't they? Just ban fossil fuel mining.
Fossil fuels, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's impossible to it's impossible to say, okay, well, I'm going to get all of my my source of energy from one thing or another, because
They're not.
it's a mix.
Yeah, because they're not plugged into. Yeah, and that goes to Nick Carter's point of saying you're essentially saying what data centers can do.
Yeah,
And
that's
SHA
right.
256 hashing is banned in data centers now in New York. I think that was an astute point.